A strange man took my wife from my table and took her to dinner at his table. I watched it like it was in slow motion. His hands on her waist, the smile on her face like it was a gift she had been waiting for years. No sign of embarrassment. No look of regret. She just got up and went. Like someone who changes places because they found another one more comfortable. I remained there, motionless, with the fork suspended in the air, trapped between disbelief and the fury that was born like a volcano erupting inside my chest. There was laughter in both of their eyes. Laughter. And I thought, maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe this is a nightmare and at some point I will wake up. But no. This was the reality. The woman who shared my bed, my dreams, my pains and my victories was being led by another man to a new table. And I was just a spectator of my own end. Betrayal doesn't start with a kiss. It starts with a look, a gesture, a silent choice. It starts when the other person decides, at some point along the way, that you are no longer enough. And perhaps the cruelest thing is this, it wasn't something that happened suddenly. It wasn't a fall, it was a choice. She chose. He looked at me, looked at him, and followed. The woman I loved for years, who knew every fold of my body, every vice in my soul, simply followed. He didn't even hesitate. And the moment she laughed at one of his jokes, a piece of me died. But the part that stayed, that part didn't remain silent. That part wanted answers. I followed them both with my eyes, but remained seated. As they toasted, I chewed on the last crumb of my dignity. When the dessert arrived, I could no longer taste it. And when they got up to leave together, I understood that this wasn't a date. It was an abandonment. And it wasn't just mine. It was from everything we had built. Our home, our promises, the memories, everything had been left behind right there, at that table that now seemed too empty for so much silence. I spent that night awake. His phrase echoed in my head like a cursed taunt, "Excuse me, can I steal from you for just a moment?" As if I were an extra at my own wedding. She smiled and went. He didn't even look at me. The early morning was made up of glasses of whiskey and dangerous thoughts. But when the sun came up, I decided. I wouldn't be the man who cries in silence. I would be the man who discovers the truth. And once I discovered it, there would be no going back. Over the next few days, I became an investigator of my own misfortune. I discovered more than I wanted. I discovered it wasn't the first time. I discovered that they had met before. I discovered messages, calls, and intimate details that hurt more than any punch. And the worst part, I discovered that while I was making plans for our vacation, she was making plans to disappear. But what she didn't know, was that he also had his own plans. And they didn't include her. Because this man, this stranger, was more than a lover. He was a player. An expert in deceiving, in involving, in sucking up everything he could and disappearing. She fell like so many others fell. Blind. Believing that I was exchanging stability for passion, routine for adventure. She didn't know she was just trading a safe life for a bottomless pit. And when he broke up with her in the cruelest way, when he simply disappeared with all of her savings, including what she had surreptitiously taken from our joint account, she ran to me. And I received it. But not with open arms. I received her with a smile. One of those smiles that contain a hidden poison. I scheduled a dinner. In the same restaurant. At the same table. And when she arrived, with puffy eyes and shame disguised as regret, I stood up. Everyone in the restaurant was looking at us. And so, with a firm voice and a peaceful heart, I asked for a divorce right then and there. And before she could react, I placed an envelope on the table. Inside, evidence. Photos. Copies of statements. Messages. And the best, a note from her own lover saying he never loved her. That it was only there for convenience. I had discovered everything. Every detail. Every lie. Every false touch. And now, it was my turn to leave. But what she doesn't know, what no one knows yet, is what I did next. Because this story doesn't end there. There's something that happened after that dinner. Something she would never have imagined. Something that caused her to not only lose her lover, her money and her husband. She lost much more. And when she finally finds out, it will be too late. Now the question that remains is, what happened after that dinner? What silent plan was put into practice behind the scenes of a betrayal? And who is the woman who came my way when I no longer believed in love, and showed me that sometimes, the end is just the beginning? And most importantly, what really drove my wife to give herself so easily to a stranger? Because when the truth finally comes out, it will burn hotter than the act of betrayal itself. It will show that, deep down, she never betrayed me out of love. She betrayed me out of ambition. And the price she paid for it, was too high. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support or romanticize any type of betrayal. All the stories told are fictional, created to show how infidelity is capable of destroying lives, dreams and families. The moral is clear: whoever cheats, loses, always. Get ready now to dive into an intense, emotional and shocking narrative. Take a deep breath, the story will begin. Jonathan and Emily seemed like the type of couple who, when entering any room, naturally caught everyone's eye. Not because of excess, nor because of theatrical displays of affection, but because of the lightness with which they moved through life together, as if they had been sculpted for each other, as if time, mistakes and pain had subtly drawn a silent understanding between them. They had been married for 12 years, and together they had built more than one home. They had created a solid, peaceful routine, almost immune to the noises of the world. He, a partner in a growing digital marketing agency, was recognized for his balanced stance, thoughtful decisions and ability to listen before speaking. She, in turn, had left her old job at a fashion production company to dedicate herself to the art gallery that she had opened just over 2 years ago, a project that had emerged as an old dream and was now materializing in small but elegant exhibitions, always full of meaning. The house where they lived reflected exactly their personalities. Located on a quiet, tree-lined street, it had a discreet facade, large windows and a garden carefully maintained by Emily, who found her refuge there on Sunday mornings. The walls were lined with paintings that she selected herself, many by new artists, others from classic collections, but all chosen with a purpose: to tell a story. Jonathan used to joke that she had a rare gift of seeing the soul in things, something that, for him, was both charming and distant, as if Emily was always with one foot in reality and the other in art, floating between the two worlds. The relationship between them was not perfect, but it was stable. There was admiration, affection, and above all respect. They talked frequently, exchanging ideas about everything: politics, films, art, business. Jonathan, although practical, was an excellent listener. Emily, intense and detailed, always knew how to express herself. At dinners with friends, it was common to hear comments about how inspiring they were together, the kind of couple who seemed to have found the balance between love and partnership. And indeed, there was a real connection there. Not those explosive or melodramatic ones, but a connection built on shared silences, on decisions made by mutual agreement, on nights that ended with restrained laughter and hands clasped under the blanket. In recent months, however, something subtle had changed. There were no discussions, nor disagreements. It was something more delicate, almost imperceptible, like the feeling that time inside that house was passing differently, more slowly. Jonathan began spending more hours at the office, immersed in demanding client projects and endless meetings that never seemed to fit into business hours. Emily, on the other hand, immersed herself in the gallery with even more intensity, expanding contacts, organizing events, and attending cocktail parties that required her to be increasingly present outside the home. They still saw each other, they still touched each other, they still exchanged affectionate messages throughout the day, but the frequency of true meetings, those where eyes meet and time slows down, had decreased. Despite this, there was no formal complaint between them. Jonathan admired the gallery's growth and was proud of Emily's courage in leaving a stable career to reinvent herself. Emily, in turn, saw Jonathan as a safe haven, a man of integrity, who, even when faced with the pressure of a competitive market, remained honest and present in matters that concerned the home and the relationship. It was as if they were both walking in different directions, but still holding on to the ends of the same rope, trying to keep the tension balanced enough so that the thread wouldn't break. In the eyes of anyone who saw them from the outside, everything was in order. Social media posts still showed well-presented dinners, short weekend trips, and shared smiles. But the photos, although true, did not reveal the voids that grew in the spaces between one click and another. The last trip they took together, to an inn in a seaside village, was marked more by contemplative silences than by deep conversations. Emily seemed to always be thinking about something she didn't share, and Jonathan, despite noticing this, didn't insist. Perhaps because he was also harboring his own concerns. There was one night in particular that stood out in their memories, although they never talked about it. It was dinner at a new restaurant in the city, inviting, with a modern atmosphere, with low lighting and ambient music that seemed to have been chosen to accompany the intimate conversations. That night, the two had arrived together, but something hovered between them. Jonathan had been away all day, a work trip, straight back to the meeting. Emily was already there when he arrived, wearing a burgundy dress that she rarely wore, her hair down and a perfume that he recognized from afar. She looked beautiful. Impeccable. But distant. During dinner, they talked about the gallery's next exhibition, the agency's new client, exchanged polite smiles and even toasted. But the connection seemed to be somewhere else. Jonathan felt it, but said nothing. He attributed it to exhaustion, stress, and adult life that does not always allow for complete commitment. Emily, in turn, looked away from time to time towards the entrance of the restaurant, as if waiting for something, or someone. Jonathan noticed. But he didn't confront it. Dessert arrived, coffees were served, and the final silence of the night was filled with a light, almost formal kiss. They returned home and fell asleep as usual, back to back, like someone who shared the same space but dreamed in opposite directions. That night was a turning point. Not because of anything concrete that happened, but because of the silent certainty that settled inside each one. Emily began to get lost in thought during gallery meetings. Jonathan, in turn, started leaving home early, even on days when he didn't need to. Both avoided difficult questions, as if the absence of confrontation was a way of preserving what little was left. Did they still love each other? It was difficult to know. Love, when suffocated by time and routine, tends to disguise itself as a memory. Close friends were beginning to realize something, even if they didn't say it. Emily was more scattered in social gatherings, and Jonathan avoided talking about her in casual conversations. It was as if they were becoming parallel pieces on a board that they previously shared. And even so, there was no anger, no explicit hurt. Just tiredness. That silent tiredness that comes from the constant attempt to look good, to maintain appearances, to support a structure that, inside, already had cracks. Amidst all this, there was still a discreet attempt to maintain the rituals. The shared breakfast on Sundays, the good morning messages, dinner on Fridays. But even these once spontaneous gestures now felt like emotional obligations. Jonathan was beginning to wonder when they stopped looking into each other's eyes. Emily wondered if he still saw her the way he used to, if he still noticed the details, the new haircut, the tiredness in her eyes. The questions came, but were not said. They kept them, like someone hiding a cracked vase so that no one can see it before the visit. And then the invitation came. An elegant corporate event, a charity dinner hosted by an important client of Jonathan's. Emily hesitated to go. She said she was tired, that she had an appointment early the next day. But, in front of his eyes, she agreed. Prepared carefully. Long dress, light makeup, a necklace he had given her on a past birthday. They arrived together. Greeted with smiles and camera flashes, as always. But that night, something would definitely move toward the unexpected. The soft music, the attentive waiters, the glasses of sparkling wine, everything seemed carefully orchestrated for a perfect evening. But for one of them, it would be the beginning of something that could never be undone. A silent step towards a choice that would change everything. And there, on that night that seemed like just one of many, Jonathan and Emily's paths began to separate definitively, although neither of them knew it yet. And what was about to happen would leave no room for doubt. Not even for return. The charity dinner promoted by Jonathan's agency was, in theory, another one of those formal evenings that accumulated throughout the couple's calendar of social commitments. It was the type of event in which smiles were trained, words were carefully chosen and gestures seemed part of a pre-established choreography. Emily knew exactly how to behave on nights like this. He knew when to praise, when to smile, when to be silent. She looked stunning, but there was something about the sparkle in her eyes that didn't match the shine of her makeup. Jonathan, attentive to details as always, noticed the subtle distance with which she treated him, but chose not to comment. Not that night, not in front of so many eyes. He introduced her to colleagues and clients, she maintained her elegance, but inside, something about her seemed missing, as if she was trying to stay above ground while sinking somewhere else, invisible to everyone. The room was large, the yellowish lights created an intimate atmosphere, and the waiters circulated like discreet shadows between the tables. There was music, restrained laughter, and the clinking of glasses with each new toast. Jonathan participated in business conversations, made contacts, exchanged cards. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to float between the groups, responding sympathetically, but with that vacant gaze that no longer sought his. When their eyes met, she smiled almost automatically, and then looked away, as if she didn't want to maintain contact for too long. Jonathan felt it like a cold touch on his chest, but he pushed the discomfort to some corner of his consciousness. It was just another night, he told himself. Another social event, another opportunity to strengthen professional alliances. But there was a moment when everything changed. Jonathan had gone away to answer an urgent call from his partner and, upon returning, he saw from afar the scene that would remain engraved in his mind like a scar. An elegant man, with a confident posture, was standing next to the table where Emily was. She laughed at something he said and, to Jonathan's surprise, the stranger extended his hand as if inviting her to dance, or something else. What happened next was as quick as it was disturbing. Emily accepted his hand. He got up. And the two walked together towards the other table, as if they were old acquaintances, as if she wasn't accompanied by her husband. Jonathan froze. For a moment, his body didn't respond, his feet rooted to the ground. He saw the two of them sit down, she crossed her legs lightly, leaned in to listen to him carefully and laughed again, this time more intensely. There was no scandal. There was no scene. There was silence. A silence that squeezed the chest like a closed fist. Jonathan returned to the table but did not sit down. He walked towards the bar, ordered a glass of whiskey, and remained there for a few minutes, observing everything from afar. Emily had forgotten about him. Or worse, I had decided to ignore him. The man, in turn, seemed too comfortable. Jonathan didn't recognize him, which was strange considering most of those present were part of the same social circle. That didn't make sense. But more than trying to understand, he felt something different, something that wasn't just anger. It was a kind of internal break, as if, upon seeing her laugh with another man, something inside him broke into tiny pieces. On the way home, few words were exchanged. Jonathan tried to start a conversation, but she responded vaguely, almost monosyllabically. She said she was tired, that the jump was bothering her, and that the event had been long. He pretended to believe it. Deep down, I no longer believed in anything. During the early hours of the morning, he lay awake, lying on his side, staring at the ceiling. Emily slept next to him, or pretended to sleep. And he, with his eyes fixed on the darkness, began to weave questions and hypotheses. Why did that man approach her so naturally? How did she react with such familiarity? And, above all, what did he represent? There was no more room for doubt. Something had changed. Over the next few days, Jonathan turned discomfort into action. He began to notice small signs. The messages she answered while hiding her cell phone, the extra punctual departures, the new clothes that didn't match the commitments she claimed to have. He didn't mention anything, he didn't confront, he just mentally noted each new piece of the puzzle. One day, he decided to follow her. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find, but I needed answers. And then he saw it. With your own eyes. He saw the car park on a street far from the center, he saw Emily come out with quick steps and an attentive look. She saw the same man from dinner appear around the corner, hug her intimately, and together they entered a small, private bistro. He couldn't hear the words exchanged, but he didn't need to. The gestures, the smiles, the looks said it all. He returned home with a bitter taste in his mouth. He sat on the porch, lit a cigarette, a habit he had abandoned years ago, and stayed there for hours. The pain didn't come with screams. It was silent, corrosive. Emily arrived late, justifying herself with another gallery event. He listened, nodded, kissed her on the forehead. I didn't say I knew. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand where this was going. And most importantly, I needed proof. In the days that followed, he hired an investigator. Before long, photos arrived. Conversations, times, places. It wasn't just a sporadic case. It was a relationship. A bond she had built with someone outside of her home, while still sleeping next to her and calling it love. Emily continued to pretend. I kept the routine, the commitments, the little delicacies. But she didn't realize that her husband had stopped being just the man of the house. He was now also the silent judge, the chronicler of her downfall. Every gesture, every lie, was written down as a disguised confession. Jonathan watched her like someone reading the end of a book that pretends to be just beginning. And even with everything he already knew, he didn't confront it. I was waiting. The right time. The right word. The right hit. And that moment has arrived. It was late afternoon, in the same restaurant where the charity dinner had taken place. Jonathan knew they would be there. The investigator had confirmed it. He knew the time, the table, the plan. It arrived early. He ordered a glass of wine and sat alone at a table in the corner. And he watched. She came in wearing a dress he had never seen before. He was smiling. The man accompanied her, with the same confident air as before. The two sat down, ordered wine, intertwined their fingers on the table. Jonathan, motionless, watched everything. I no longer felt pain. I felt something new. A kind of clarity that was accompanied by a dangerous calm. He got up. He crossed the room with slow, steady steps. He stopped next to their table. Emily saw him and turned pale. The man looked at him in surprise. Jonathan said nothing. He just stared into her eyes, for a long time. Then he turned and left. There were no more words needed. The truth was exposed. The betrayal didn't need to be explained. She had been witnessed. Registered. Recorded in memory like a landmark. From then on, nothing would be the same again. That night, Emily returned home alone. Jonathan did not return. His absence was not accompanied by messages or calls. Just silence. A silence that said more than any argument. And as she sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand what was coming next, she had no idea that what had really happened was yet to be discovered. Because what she believed to be rock bottom was actually just the first step to the fall. And the secret that was about to emerge, would change everything. The next morning, Emily woke up to a dense silence, the kind that doesn't break with the sound of the kettle or the water running from the shower. It was the silence of a definitive absence. Jonathan wasn't home, his clothes were missing from the closet, and even his smell seemed to have dissolved into the air. When he went downstairs, he saw the coffee table set, but cold, like a performance without an audience. There was a note, carefully folded on the wood. She hesitated before touching, as if its tips might burn her. When he opened it, he found just one sentence: "Today you will understand what it means to lose what you don't value." The words were calm, but they carried a weight that made her take a step back, her stomach churning with a mixture of fear and regret. Hours later, while she was still trying to call Jonathan, trying to come up with a justification, an explanation, anything that would take her away from that feeling of falling into an abyss, she received a message from an unknown number with an address and a single instruction: "If you want to understand, be here at 4 p.m. She recognized the neighborhood. It was the old center, where there were some commercial offices and, curiously, also the boutique hotel where I had stayed twice with the man who now could barely look in the mirror. Emily's heart quickened. Something was wrong. This had nothing to do with jealousy. It was different. Jonathan had never been one to play games. I never had this passive-aggressive side. Her mind began to put together theories, all based on panic and guilt. But nothing would prepare her for what awaited her. He arrived punctually, with shaking hands. The building had mirrored glass doors, a silent reception, and an elevator that took her to the 12th floor, where the apartment number matched what appeared on the intercom screen. The door opened before she even rang the bell. Jonathan was there, calm, a slight smile on his lips, but his eyes were dark, without any trace of tenderness. Behind him, a tidy room, with a table set for two, and in the corner, a small TV on an iron stand. Without saying anything, he motioned for her to enter. Emily entered. She wanted to speak, but was interrupted by his gesture. He put his finger to his lips, asking for silence, and pointed to the chair in front of the screen. Then he pressed the button on the remote control. The image appeared. It was a recording from a bank security system. It took Emily a few seconds to understand what it was about, until she saw herself sneaking into the agency, accompanied by a man wearing a cap, simple clothes and sunglasses. It was the same man she had been involved with. Next, the images showed the two of them at the ATM, where she withdrew a large amount of money, which she then handed to him, as if they were just carrying out a casual transaction. Jonathan paused the video and turned to her, arms crossed. Emily, as white as a sheet, tried to explain. He said it was a loan, that he was going through difficulties, that he had insisted. Jonathan shook his head slowly in disbelief. Without raising his voice, he began to speak. He said he had hired a detective to understand who that man was. That had tracked his contacts, history, and even his bank details. He discovered that this was someone who did this for a living, approaching vulnerable women, especially married and financially stable ones, getting emotionally involved, and then extracting everything he could. Emily tried to interrupt, but he continued. He said that man had already done the same to 4 other women in the last 2 years. Who used different names, disposable numbers, and who disappeared as soon as he reached his goal. Jonathan showed the evidence, photos, conversations recovered from discarded cell phones, filed complaints, police reports in other cities. Emily, frozen, put her hands over her mouth. The body trembled. She remembered her last meeting with that man. He had promised that they would soon run away together, that he had plans to start a new life in another country, and that he just needed that last bit of support to solve an urgent problem. It was a large amount, but Emily was too blind to question it. In love, she believed she was exchanging a cold life for a fresh start. But after that day, he just disappeared. Disappeared from the map. The messages were no longer arriving, the number was disconnected. And now she knew why. Jonathan approached and, with a bitter expression, said that he had predicted this outcome. That from the moment he saw that man at dinner, he knew he was no ordinary person. That there was something about him that sounded dissonant. And, as painful as it was, he decided not to stop it. He watched everything. Recorded everything. And when he realized she was willing to cross the last line, the line of theft, of abandonment disguised as love, he let it happen. Because sometimes, allowing mistakes is the only way to open the eyes of those who refuse to see. Emily burst into tears. She tried to apologize, she tried to say that she was deceived, that she never wanted to hurt him, that she still loved him. But each word seemed too fragile, too empty. Jonathan just listened, with the same look as someone watching a play who already knows the ending. So he said the money wasn't the real loss. That the real robbery had happened long before, when she stopped sharing her life with him to share fantasies with a stranger. And now, he was finally free. Because cheating isn't just sleeping with someone else. It's planning away from others. It's lying with your eyes open. It's turning your back on a story constructed with such care. He then handed her an envelope. Inside, divorce papers. Already signed by him. She said that she had left the house, that the property would remain with her, but that her share of the common assets was being allocated to an educational fund, in the name of orphan children. Emily didn't understand. Jonathan explained that he had decided to turn that pain into something useful, and that, unlike the man who deceived her, he would not take away, but would give. And that would be his last lesson. Before leaving, she tried to hold him back. He begged for one more chance. She cried, knelt down, saying that now she saw everything, that she understood her mistake, that she was willing to rebuild. But Jonathan was unmoved. He was no longer the same man. The one she knew, the one she betrayed, the one she believed was always ready to forgive, that one no longer existed. What stood before her now was someone who, although gone, had rebuilt himself at the very moment he no longer needed her explanations. And as he closed the door behind him, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, relief. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't come with smiles, nor with reunions. Sometimes it comes with a break. With the pain necessary to break once and for all the bond that no longer supported anything but hurt. He descended the floors with firm steps, went out into the street, took a deep breath. The world outside was the same, but inside, everything had changed. And at the end of that same day, when he happened to come across a curious look from a woman who smiled with her eyes, a sincere, simple look, with no past, Jonathan realized that perhaps fate, even cruel, still knew how to reward those who choose to leave in one piece where they could have been torn apart forever. That same night, after leaving the apartment where he had finally unmasked the woman he once loved, Jonathan drove aimlessly for almost an hour, his hands firmly on the steering wheel and his mind silently combusting. I didn't feel angry, nor did I feel relief. It was a new, strange neutrality, as if he were inhabiting an empty body, as if he had witnessed his own emotional death and now, stripped of any illusion, just occupied the space that remained. The sound of the hazard lights filled the car in measured pauses, as he parked in front of the city's highest viewpoint, from where he could see an ocean of light stretching to the horizon. He sat on the wall, feeling the wind cut his face and his thoughts get confused by the night gusts. For the first time in a long time, there was no one waiting for him. And even if there was, I wouldn't know who this him was anymore. At the same moment, Emily was walking from one side of the living room to the other, the envelope with the divorce papers in hand, as if she expected that, at any moment, that paper would burst into flames or transform into a different message. Nothing happened. The air in the house seemed thicker, as if Jonathan's absence had taken the oxygen from the rooms. He tried to call again, but his phone was off. The pain was physical now. It wasn't just regret. It was panic. Not because of the divorce itself, but because of the way everything fell apart silently, without scandal, without fight, without appeal. Jonathan didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just turned his back. And that hurt more than any scandal could. The next day, Emily tried to look for him at the office, but learned that he had taken an indefinite leave of absence. He tried to contact mutual friends, but no one knew his whereabouts. It was then that he received a message on his personal email. The sender was his lawyer. A formal text, with clear guidance on the sharing process and signing of remaining documents. There was no room for conversation. Everything was decided. It was as if Jonathan was putting an end not only to the marriage, but to every form of bond, like someone deleting a number from their diary and blocking all possible return routes. 3 weeks passed. Emily signed the papers, submitted everything as requested, and tried to return to her routine, but her routine no longer welcomed her. The gallery seemed like a strange place. The pictures hanging on the walls now seemed to mock her with their intense colors and hidden meanings. The void left by his absence was not just domestic. There was a vacuum in the center of his chest. She tried to seek comfort in therapy, in long walks, in books she couldn't finish. But nothing filled what had been destroyed. It was like living after a fire, stepping on the ashes of what was once home. One night, as she entered a cafe she frequented during the first years of her relationship with Jonathan, she saw a scene that made her heart stop for a moment. There he was, sitting next to the glass display case, at one of the tables closest to the sidewalk, smiling serenely at a woman she had never seen. The scene was simple: 2 cups of coffee, a real smile, a present look. But for Emily, this was like being punched in the stomach. The naturalness with which he seemed to be there, living, talking, making space for someone else, was like cruel proof that she had definitely been replaced. Not that there was any harm in moving on, but the fact that he had done so, and so soon, brutally exposed how disposable she had been to him in that final moment. She didn't go in. She just watched from the sidewalk, hidden behind the reflection of the shop windows. Jonathan didn't see her. He continued smiling, stirring his coffee calmly. Emily tried to rationalize. Maybe she was just a friend. A casual encounter. But the way he listened to the woman, with true attention, the way he tilted his body towards her, as if every word said was valuable, revealed something deeper. There was no guilt there, no rush. Just lightness. And that was unbearable to see. The next day, Emily sent Jonathan a message. Not to ask for explanations about that woman, he no longer had that right, but to ask for one last conversation. A chance to say what he couldn't say. It took him days to respond. When he finally did, it was with a single sentence: "I'll be at the park at 6 p.m., on the bench by the lake." It was a symbolic place. There they had discussed the future, cried together over losses, celebrated silent achievements. It was, perhaps, the only place where she still felt like they could talk without the walls hearing them. Emily arrived ahead of schedule. The sky was amber, and the wind made the leaves move like little voices whispering among the branches. When Jonathan appeared, walking slowly with his hands in his pockets, something inside her broke once again. He seemed so calm, so resolved, that for a moment she doubted whether he had ever really loved her as he claimed. They sat in silence. He waited for her to speak. Emily took a deep breath and, with her eyes fixed on the water, began. He said he had no excuses. That she had been blind, reckless, and that she still struggled to understand what led her to let herself be carried away. He spoke about the emptiness he felt, the shame, the despair. She told how she had been deceived, how she felt like an idiot. Jonathan listened to her in silence, without interrupting. She then looked at him, desperate, and asked why he had been so cold, why he didn't scream, why he didn't fight, why he just disappeared. He looked at her for long seconds, as if he was deciding whether he should even respond, and then, in a low but firm voice, he said that the answer lay in what she herself hadn't been able to perceive. That his love had died long before his last mistake. That the betrayal was not the trigger, but the confirmation. That he had already felt the distance, the subtle contempt in her gestures, the absences disguised as routine. That he tried, for a long time, to hold the structure, but that no one can support the weight of two alone. And when she fell, he wasn't surprised, just sad for having believed it would be different. Emily then asked about the woman at the coffee shop. Jonathan smiled, a light smile, without provocation, and said that she was someone who had appeared without promises, without demands, and that for that reason it seemed more true than anything he had experienced in recent years. He said he didn't know what it would become, but that for the first time he felt peace. Emily cried, but didn't ask for anything else. She knew. It was late. The love she wanted back no longer existed. And even if it existed, now it belonged to someone else. He got up, thanked him for coming, and walked away, without looking back. Because even the deepest love needs dignity to leave. Jonathan remained on the bench, watching the leaves fall into the lake. I felt no euphoria, no triumph. I just felt sure that I had done what needed to be done. And deep down, a rare peace, the kind that only comes after the most brutal storm. The kind of peace that only those who had the courage to start over from scratch know. That same week, the days passed like loose leaves, swept away by an unpredictable wind that didn't follow any pattern. Emily was trying to get back on track, but the track was gone. The silence that fell after her last conversation with Jonathan was no longer just his absence in her life, it was the realization that nothing she had been still worked in the same way. The faces of the gallery staff became opaque, the artists seemed to speak languages she no longer understood, and even the works that once moved her now seemed empty, like windows open to a world in which she no longer had a place. The divorce was already signed, made official, each party with its terms and values defined, but there was a type of loss that could not be resolved with signatures. The loss of herself. The loss of the woman who believed herself to be unshakable, desirable, strategic, safe. Now she walked with her shoulders hunched, her eyes fleeting, carrying the shame of someone who discovered the value of what they had too late. Jonathan, in turn, seemed to move on another frequency. His days weren't free of memories, but he no longer let them take over. There was a quiet melancholy some mornings, especially when I woke up in the middle of the night and reached for the side of the bed that now belonged only to the cold sheet. But he no longer drowned in these voids. I had learned to cross them with dignity. The woman he had been seen with at the coffee shop, Helena, appeared in his life like a chance that didn't require a hurry. She did not demand the past, nor did she guarantee the future. It was light, sincere, present. Jonathan still didn't know if that was love or just breathing, but, after the storm he experienced, any presence that didn't suffocate him was a welcome balm. Still, he maintained a certain caution. He had been betrayed, deceived, broken into parts that were still being glued together. Trusting again was not a simple decision. It was a process. And he knew it. Meanwhile, Emily was faced with the social consequences of her choice. The circle of friendships that previously orbited around the couple had now shrunk, divided, become silent. Some looked at her with pity, others with disapproval, and those closest to Jonathan didn't even return her messages. She tried not to care, but loneliness took on new forms every day. There were nights when she woke up crying, not understanding whether it was from anger at herself, from longing for what she lost, or from fear of what she would never have again. She went back to places that were familiar to her, like old cafes and hidden bookstores, in a desperate attempt to find something that would reconnect her with the woman she was before everything happened. But even those places now seemed filled with painful memories. It was like living among ghosts. The cruelest dilemma, however, was not the pain. It was the realization that she could no longer go back. Emily knew deep down that there was no fixing what she broke. I knew that even if Jonathan accepted a reconciliation, he would never be the same man. And she, not the same woman, either. Then he began to question whether it was worth continuing to try to seek forgiveness or whether he should, finally, accept the fall. This doubt gnawed at her. She saw Jonathan, in rare casual encounters, always with that calm, centered look, and no matter how much she wanted to, she could no longer reach him. He seemed to have moved to another time, another maturity, another type of man. One she no longer deserved to have around. One day, while returning from a meeting with the therapist, Emily stopped in front of the school where she used to teach art classes to children as part of an old voluntary project, which she abandoned when the gallery started to make a profit. She stayed there, standing in front of the closed gate, for almost half an hour, until one of the coordinators recognized her and approached her. They exchanged few words, but enough to rekindle something in her. A reminder of the time when your presence was a source of inspiration for other people, not disappointment. It made her think that maybe her life could have meaning again if she reconnected with something true. No pretensions, no masks. Not to prove something to someone, but to find yourself again. That night, he sent an email offering to return to teaching voluntarily. Not as an attempt at redemption, but as a small gesture of reconstruction. Jonathan, even in the face of this new calm, faced his own dilemmas. Helena was kind, had a light sense of humor and a rare listening ear. With her, he was able to laugh again, talk about banal subjects, watch films without the need to read between the lines. But there were times when, even with her, his mind went back to his years with Emily. Not with longing, but with the desire to understand how they had lost themselves. One afternoon, as they walked through a park, she held his hand and asked if he felt ready to love again. Jonathan took a while to respond. He said he was learning. That I wanted to be. That there were still scars, but he didn't want them to define him. Helena smiled, shook his hand and replied that she didn't expect perfection, just presence. He looked into her eyes and felt something different, not euphoria, but a calm, solid warmth. And maybe that was what he needed right now. Love without storm. A few days later, Jonathan and Emily crossed paths again, this time by an inevitable coincidence, the opening of a new wing of the art gallery, financed by a municipal fund on which Jonathan's agency had consulted. He attended out of professional commitment, she out of emotional need. When they saw each other, there was no hostility, no discomfort. Just a silent recognition of the past they carried together. They exchanged brief greetings, eye to eye, as if they knew there was a lot to be said, but the words no longer fit. Emily, when speaking on the microphone to the guests, briefly mentioned the importance of starting over, recognizing failures and allowing art to transform pain into bridges. Jonathan listened silently, with respect. He didn't applaud more than the others, he didn't smile differently, but in the end, before leaving, he passed by her and said, in a firm but gentle tone, that he hoped she would really rebuild herself, not for him, but for herself. Emily nodded, with tears in her eyes, but without asking for anything else. After that night, the meetings became rare, accidental, each one following their own trail. Jonathan became more involved with social projects and led a marketing campaign for mental health causes, something that had deeply touched his recent experience. Helena accompanied him when she could, but always respecting his space. They didn't live together yet, they didn't talk about the future with dates, but there was something strong and silent between them, a kind of commitment that didn't need to be said to be understood. It was a relationship made up of presences, not promises. Emily, on the other hand, was slowly gaining another type of strength. Classes with children became her refuge, and there she rediscovered parts of herself that had been dormant. The gallery continued to operate, with less glamour, but with more truth. She started to select exhibitions that talked about new beginnings, about losses, about tortuous paths that can also lead to beautiful landscapes. One rainy afternoon, alone in the gallery, she observed a painting she had commissioned from an unknown young artist. It was a simple picture, a broken bridge, whose two ends tried to reach each other through tree branches that grew from the banks. She smiled. I didn't know if that painting was a mirror or a window. But he knew that, somewhere inside him, there was something new growing too. And so, the days became less heavy. Neither for Jonathan nor for Emily was there a classic happy ending. But perhaps there was something more valuable than that, the maturity of recognizing mistakes, the courage to go through one's own wreckage and the relief of finding, after the destruction, another version of oneself that is still worth living. And although the end had not yet completely arrived, what would come after was already taking shape with a calm and inevitable force. Because some stories, even when they seem to have ended, still have their last lines to surprise in a definitive way. In the spring of that same year, the city seemed to breathe differently. The longer days filled the sidewalks with golden light and the slight heat made people occupy the parks with silent, almost involuntary joy. Jonathan, despite not being exactly a nostalgic man, found this time of year a kind of relief. He walked more slowly through the streets, enjoyed the outdoor cafes and carried a notebook with him where he sketched out ideas for projects that mixed art, communication and social impact. Helena, although she maintained her life in parallel, accompanied him with increasing frequency, not as someone who imposes her presence, but as someone who shares the space without disturbing the internal silence of someone who is still undergoing reconstruction. There was a harmony between them made of silent understanding, the kind of connection that doesn't require proof and that grows in small gestures. Jonathan still carried scars, but he no longer hid them. He spoke about them calmly, and this, paradoxically, made Helena admire him more. Not because he had overcome everything, but because he had decided not to let the past define his next steps. Emily, in turn, had given herself wholeheartedly to the project with the children. She redesigned the activity space at the public school where she taught as a volunteer, painted murals with the students and began dedicating her evenings to writing short illustrated children's stories, based on the stories she heard there. She never imagined that one day she would find herself in simplicity, but now it was there, among colorful papers and high-pitched voices telling secrets about monsters and dreams, that she felt most human. There was no regret, because that was already part of her. There was something different now, a search for belonging that didn't depend on being accepted back by anyone, but on accepting yourself as you were. The pain still came, especially on nights when I slept too late or woke up too early. But it was no longer the paralyzing pain of the first few months. It was a pain more like a reminder, something that remained, but no longer stopped her from moving forward. It was on a Friday afternoon, at an art event organized by the foundation that Jonathan had helped to sponsor, that the two saw each other again, this time without warning, without an invitation. Emily had been asked to do a workshop with the neighborhood's children, a proposal that came to her through the new coordinator of the cultural center. I didn't know that Jonathan would be there, and he, in turn, didn't imagine that she would participate as a guest. When their eyes met, there was a second of suspension. They both stopped, as if something was pulling them back to a place where the noises of the world dissolved. But soon the ambient sound regained its strength, and they returned to take their places in the now. After his speech on stage, in which he presented the results of the project with data and moving stories from families who had been impacted, Jonathan went down one side, avoiding the commotion from the audience. Emily, who was watching from afar, slowly approached. When they were face to face, he greeted her with a discreet wave, and she smiled, not like someone expecting something, but like someone recognizing a presence that was once essential. Then, without being invited, they walked together to a quieter part of the space, near a wall where drawings made by the children hung. Emily played one of them, made by an 8-year-old girl, with crooked features and a pink sun at the top. She said, in a low voice, that there was a world she would never have known if life had gone the way she planned. Jonathan listened and responded with firm gentleness, saying that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find a new piece of your soul. Emily then asked how he was really doing. He took a deep breath before responding. He said it was whole, but not in the same way. That I had built a new stability, but it didn't come without effort. He spoke of Helena without exaltation, just as someone who was part of the present with lightness and respect. Emily listened with teary eyes, not out of jealousy or a desire to return, but out of a kind of mature sadness, the kind that arises when you understand that time has really passed and that the road is now different. Then she opened her heart in a way she never had since her divorce. She said that she had felt hatred towards herself for months, that she had wanted to undo the past in 1,000 ways, but that now, seeing him standing upright, in one piece, with another woman and with such a solid purpose, she no longer felt the desire to go back. I just felt the desire for him to be happy, truly happy. And that she could also, one day, allow herself to live with that same peace. Jonathan listened without rushing, without interrupting. When she finished, he just put his hand on her shoulder and said that no one is defined by their mistakes, but by how they deal with their consequences. And that, despite everything, he would always cherish the good years they had. She smiled. There was no more pain there. Just a beautiful melancholy, the kind that doesn't suffocate, just reminds you that there was something worth it. Later, at the same event, Jonathan went on stage with one of the young participants in the project and presented a symbolic award to the boy, who had created an accessibility application for the visually impaired. The audience applauded enthusiastically, and he came down with a bright face. Helena was waiting for him near the entrance. When they met, she held his hand, and they exchanged a long look, full of unspoken words. Emily, in the background, watched the scene with a serene smile. It was strange to realize that the end of their marriage had also been the beginning of a new story for everyone involved. But somehow, it comforted her. Knowing that the pain he caused had not only left wreckage, but also new constructions. At the end of the event, as the last guests left the room, Emily walked to the exit carrying a brown envelope. Inside was an outline for her first children's book, which began with a girl lost in a dark forest and ended with her building a bridge out of her own branches. He handed the envelope to the cultural coordinator and said it was still a draft, but that he would like to see it become something real. The coordinator read the title in a low voice, "The Place Where the Sun Rises Again." And he promised that he would do everything to make sure that story found its way. Jonathan and Helena, on the other hand, left the event hand in hand, taking their time, talking about dinner and laughing about something trivial. Their lives weren't perfect, but they had room for imperfection. And that was enough. The night continued peacefully, the sky was clear and the steps were light, as if with each street they left behind another layer of what was no longer useful. Emily, at home, made some tea and sat down at the computer. He began reviewing the texts, adjusting an illustration, correcting the narrative. She felt alive. Not immune to pain, but resistant to it. And so, without anyone realizing exactly when, the story that seemed to have irreversibly fallen apart began to take on new forms, more subtle, more real. The love was gone, but not the capacity to love. And with each new step, the characters in that story moved away from the ruins to finally understand that starting over does not require immediate forgiveness, nor complete oblivion, but just the courage to walk even with hurt feet. Because sometimes, the true ending is just the beginning of a more honest life. More free. More alive. A few months after that event at the cultural center, everyone's paths seemed to have taken on definitive, albeit silently transitory, forms, as if each one was living the next chapter without the need to announce it. Jonathan, finally, decided to do something that had been on his mind for a long time, close his partnership with the agency and embark on his own project, more authorial, more linked to his essence. He created a small consultancy, focused exclusively on social and cultural impact ventures, where the focus was not profit, but legacy. I worked less, earned less, but slept better. Alongside Helena, he found a type of love that didn't require constant effort to exist. There was no demand for who he was before, no comparisons with what he was. She welcomed him in the present and, therefore, he could breathe in peace. Their coexistence, although recent, became stable enough for him to feel comfortable starting over with firm feet. One afternoon, after they returned from a visit to an NGO for hearing-impaired children, sitting on the balcony of their apartment, he turned to her with a restrained smile and said that, for the first time in many years, he felt exactly where he should be. Helena didn't respond with words, she just rested her head on his shoulder and let the silence say the rest. Emily, in turn, was beginning to experience the first signs of real rebirth. His children's book, reviewed and approved by the Cultural Center's curators, was published with the support of a reading incentive project and launched in a simple but affectionate event. Parents and children attended, some former students brought flowers, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like her name was spoken with affection, not judgment. But the definitive turning point came one cloudy morning, when she received an unexpected call from one of the wives of the other victims of the same man she had been involved with. The woman, with a calm and direct voice, said that they had met, that they had filed formal complaints and, with the help of a criminal lawyer, managed to pressure the authorities to open a more robust investigation. The man had finally been located, arrested in another city with false documents, accused of embezzlement and ideological falsehood. Emily was silent on the other end of the line. The woman, as if she understood the weight of that information, just finished by saying that everyone had been deceived, but that the most important thing was what they would do with this pain now. And then he hung up. In the following days, Emily fluctuated between sensations that were difficult to name. There was a feeling of justice, of course, but also a bitter aftertaste, as if his punishment wasn't enough to erase the mark of what she had allowed. However, this awareness turned into fuel. With the support of the book's publisher, he organized a series of lectures on emotional health, self-esteem and the emotional risks of abusive relationships. She did not position herself as a victim, nor as a heroine. He spoke like someone who fell, but chose to get up with dignity. With each encounter, she saw in the eyes of the women in front of her a reflection of herself months ago. And that was what motivated her. Emily had lost what she loved most, but she had found something even more valuable, her own ability to rebuild. On an afternoon that seemed like any other, Jonathan received a letter. It wasn't common, no one wrote letters anymore, but that, somehow, made sense as soon as she saw Emily's name on the sender. He sat down at the kitchen table, calmly opened it, and read. The letter did not apologize, nor did it reopen wounds. It was a thank you. Emily said that, although time could never be reversed, she needed him to know how essential his steadfastness at the moment of his fall had been to his transformation. That if he had gone back, if he had given her another chance without demanding responsibility, she might not have learned. That his absence, as painful as it was the push that made her face herself. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't cry. Just felt it. Then he kept the letter in a wooden box where he kept important souvenirs. Not as a relic of a lost past, but as a marker of a journey that finally seemed to be over. Months passed. Emily was invited to participate in a conference on literature and personal reconstruction. Jonathan and Helena followed their routine with more stability, and between brief trips, homemade lunches and community projects, they quietly created roots. One autumn night, during dinner with friends, Jonathan told the story of how he had lost everything and then understood that, sometimes, loss is just the beginning of something truer. The guests listened in silence. Nobody knew her name. It didn't even need to. The impact of the story was in the clarity with which he told it, without hurt, without vanity, just with the certainty that he had survived himself. What about the bridge? The one that seemed to fall apart between two people who were once one. It was not rebuilt. Not with the same bricks. But at the right time, in an exhibition about new beginnings promoted by the gallery where Emily worked, a new installation appeared. It was a sculpture made of dry branches and wire, representing two banks trying to reach each other. At the base of the work, a plaque with the phrase, "Some bridges don't take us back. But they still teach us how to cross." Jonathan went to the event discreetly. He saw the sculpture, read the phrase, and at that moment, he felt no sadness, only respect. Emily saw him from afar, their eyes met, and a discreet wave sealed the peace that finally inhabited them both. This story ends where others would begin. No passionate reunions, no dramatic twists. Only with real, wounded and transformed people. People who make mistakes, who fall, who break themselves, but who, instead of living trapped in guilt or the desire for revenge, choose to follow. Jonathan found a new way to love. Emily, a new way of living. And the man who tried to destroy so many lives had the outcome he deserved, oblivion. Now, I want to hear from you who made it this far. What did you think of this story? What was the moment that impacted you the most? Leave your comment below, I really want to know your opinion. And of course, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, sign up now, turn on notifications and continue following stories like this, intense, real, human. Remembering, this channel does not support, does not promote or romanticize any type of betrayal. Here, each story is a warning, a mirror and an opportunity to reflect on the consequences of our choices. Until the next story. And remember, true love is never born from lies.